Hey, this week on the podcast, Sonya and I talk about how to structure your book because it's getting close to the time where I need to begin to think about transitioning from research to writing. And when you transition from research to writing, you're talking about structure. But when you talk about structure in nonfiction books, you actually need to be inspired by fiction. What? Yes, fiction, far more than nonfiction, is the way to structure your nonfiction book. We'll explain why. If you like this episode, don't forget to rate and review it. If you want to talk more with me, hit me up at paulkicksnewsletter.com. But let's get right into it. Season 2, The Process. Hey, Sonya.
Hello.
So we're getting closer. I'm getting close to the point where, the research is starting to wrap up, close down. I'm starting to think about how to structure the book. And there's something that I think is important when any nonfiction author is thinking about structuring the book.
What's that?
You shouldn't actually be structuring it off of nonfiction books. Dun, dun, dun. Dun, 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 dun. So the reason I say that is because a lot of times people that want to do some sort of nonfiction narrative storytelling, there are enough books out there from which you could draw, but really there's so many more books that are fiction that give great clues as to how you could structure your own book. And that's kind of what I want to spend a couple minutes talking about. I first heard of this idea from Michael Lewis, the nonfiction author he's did Blindside, he did Moneyball. Moneyball might be my favorite sports book of all time. He did The Big Short. He's talked a lot about how when he's looking to structure a book, when he's looking for inspiration for one of his books, he actually looks to fiction. My friend Eli Saslow has written a couple of books, won a Pulitzer Prize at the Washington Post. He does the same thing. In fact, when I have conversations, and Eli came on the podcast last season, and when he and I talk about books, a lot of times we're talking about what inspiration can we draw from
His
fiction.
Stories are so good.
And they really are, and
They
I think
are so good.
I think like a lot of them are they're these perfect little narratives. I always tell Eli that his stories are actually the perfect little short stories, like perfect little fictions.
They really are.
They are structured that way. Their dialogue is that way. It just happens to be that every single line in them is true. For me, especially with this book, which is a book that's about 10 weeks in Birmingham, and then outside of that, the present day, what'll probably be the present day prologue and epilogue. It presents some challenges about how I can actually structure that book. And what I'm looking at is, and actually Eli and I were talking about this not long ago, what are some novels that take place in a short period of time where there's constricted movements where it's all taking place in one city. And he came up with a great example. It's Anne Patchett's Bel Canto. That's the first book that sort of put her on the map. It's a book that takes place in a fictional South American country, and in that country there is this terrorist/hostage situation, and all these people are taken hostage in this opera house. And then from there, it's people from 10, 15, maybe 20 different countries, and they're all interacting with each other in a space of a few weeks, and the story sort of evolves from there. And so there's a single day to it, and there's all these different people interacting, and then the next day builds on that. I'm trying to look at my book the same way. There's basically 6 to 8 weeks, and I want the progression to be week by week. I'm inspired by that. I'm also inspired, frankly, by Tolstoy's Anna Karenina, because when I was reading that, I noticed how all of the structure for that book was actually, he divided it into multiple books. He had book number 1, and then it would be basically a novella about a certain point in time about Anna or about any of the other protagonists. And then that would give way to book number 2, and then book number 2 would progress upon what was in book number 1. It was these sort of structuring devices that were incredibly helpful. And I feel like this is something that more nonfiction authors need to take advantage of. Of course, we should be reading our peers. Our peers are incredibly important in nonfiction. But if we are not spending inordinate amount of time studying the people across the aisle on the fiction side who are doing really innovative things with structure, who are doing really innovative, making really innovative choices with words, just introducing us to really innovative characters. There's a great book that I read last year called My Year of Rest and Relaxation, which is perhaps the raunchiest, most vile protagonist I've ever come across. But she is also, that protagonist, one of the most delightful people to read and hear. And that's because the way that novel progresses, you come to understand more of who she is and come to sympathize with her, even though she is outwardly this vile, vile creature. There's a lot of clues there for nonfiction writers. There's a lot of techniques that we can pick up. And so I'm sort of reminded, for how to structure this, one of the big things, if you're thinking about structuring your own book, think broadly speaking about, I'm going to mix metaphors here a little bit, but Stephen Johnson, another one of my real nonfiction idols, he's wrote a book called The Ghost Map. He wrote another book called Everything Bad is Actually Good for You. I love his books. A lot of them are science-based, but he said, when you think about structure, you need to think about it in terms of music. And he said, a great piece of music has a great rhythm section and a great bass section if it's like a rock band, right? And the thing is, you will never notice the drums or the bass in that. You will always notice the lead guitar and the vocals, and the lead guitar and the vocals are basically like the characters you're introduced to, and then the language that you use yourself. But if you do not spend the time to structure that book appropriately, it will break apart in the same way that a poorly thought out song without the rhythm section all worked out in advance just sounds off. There's something you can't tell what's wrong, but it doesn't sound right. Bands always talk about how tight they sound, and if they don't sound tight, you can hear the way that like the drum and the drums and the lead guitar are off. It's the same thing with nonfiction. If the structure is not right, you're kind of in trouble. So you have to think, all right, well, what's the best way to do it? And for this book, I have 4 different protagonists. And so because of that, they're going to be interacting with each other, which is why I want to briefly return to Ann Patchett's Bel Canto, right? Because they're going to be interacting with each other in an enclosed space over a short period of time, how can I have a structure that builds a structure that's sort of set in time itself, a structure that builds week by week. So I've actually divided, here's all the things that end up happening in week number 1. And week number 1 may be 7 days, it may actually be 10 days. It doesn't really matter. The point is, here's the first sort of period of time that Martin Luther King, James Bevel, Fred Shuttlesworth, that Ralph Abernathy were in Birmingham. All right, here's the initial problems they ran into. Here's where they think they found a solution to that problem, only to realize that a larger problem surfaced when they solved the first solution. Sort of end of week number 1 right there, right? And then the whole book is just going to be a series of larger problem, larger solution, which introduces us to a larger problem, which introduces the sort of largest problem of all, which is how do we actually begin to change, in the words of King, break Birmingham so that it is no longer racist. What's the things that they can do? It's important sometimes to think about craft endlessly, because without that discussion, without that sort of pre-editing that you're doing in your own head, you're just going to get so caught up on the page. So I will write out a detailed structure. Sonya, you've seen some of those detailed structures, right?
Yes, I have.
And they're sort of copious and probably to a certain extent even unnecessary, right?
Yes. One thing I want to interject here, though, is that even with, the amount of work, you work with a publisher or an editor. Editor will make changes.
Of course.
And the editor will suggest ideas. I think one thing that was really, really hard for you with the first book is you spend so much time coming up with what you think in your mind is the perfect structure to tell this story, right? Then your editor's like, no.
And then let's actually touch upon that for just a minute, because in the first draft, I thought that, to tell Robert's story, I'm going to have to tell the story of pre-war France, which means like everything that happened from World War I in Robert's family until the outset of World War II. And my editor saw that, and he's like, there is a huge and unnecessary part right in the first third of the book. And that was everything that I thought was essential in those pre-war years. And he's like, if we cut that out, right? If we cut that out and then open the book in a quote unquote present day and close the book in the same sort of present day moment.
No. I had that idea.
No, he had that idea. You don't remember it? I think he did.
Because I had that idea.
Okay, well, you had that idea. I thought he had that idea.
No.
See, this is how wise you are as an editor as well.
Very wise.
All right. Like that's the way that the book will change. But what I will say is, because I had thought through, okay, once you take out that part, that pre-war part,
you were frustrated because the book was it lagged. It was lagging in the beginning.
And once you took that out, it moved,
and you did not know what to do. You were really frustrated because you were like, I worked really hard on this, and it was a shift. It was a big difference.
It was a big difference. But I guess the point that I'm trying to get to is, once I accepted that, and you will ultimately have to accept it, then it began to work a little bit better. And I think just to return to it, I feel like it was because I had spent the time trying to structure it in advance. The rest of the book worked once we did these changes. They were not superfluous changes. They were fairly substantive.
They were substantive, but I don't think you accepted it until you realized that it could work a different way. Like, you didn't have this kumbaya moment with this decision to unilaterally change the structure of the book in the beginning until there was an alternative where you were like, that will work too. Like, there was a bumpy road there where you were like, I don't know how to fix this book. Can't fix it. And then your amazing wife came up with an idea that basically saved the day. But see, you want to leave that part out, right?
I want to edit out that part. I want to edit out that part,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And exclude that part from the structure of my story, I guess you might say.
It didn't come up on the book tour. I remember that.
The book is dedicated to you.
Yeah, but I didn't get that story.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, you're getting it right now. How about that?
Because I brought it up. That's why.
You did. You had to. Even now, you had to insert that. You had to bring it up, because otherwise it would have been excluded.
No, because you don't remember things properly, and that's what it was. You were really angry and you were frustrated that this wasn't working, and that he wanted to toss out this. And then I said, "Well, why don't you do it like this?" And you were like, "Oh, that's perfect. That works." And then you were excited again.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think once those changes were made, the rest of the edits flowed smoothly.
Yes.
Because of also the work I had done on the front side to think through the structure, right? To think through that structure. We'll see how this structure works. I really hope it does. I think there's a lot of potential there to make it as tight as it is. I don't want to say anything outside of what happened that spring. I have not seen, and we've talked about this a little bit in previous episodes, but Sonya, I have not seen a book like this before, even though this is a topic and an episode that has been covered endlessly. Once we include our own story and how we talked about this a couple weeks back, how we are sort of the descendants of Martin Luther King's dream, you and I. Once we include our sort of our marriage,
yes, but if Mr. Granger says it doesn't work,
well, not Mr. Granger, it's going to be the editor.
He's going to read it first.
Yes, it's going to be Granger, and it's going to be my editor,
Mr. Granger,
Jamie,
and then your editor.
Yes, and I'll make changes, but the point is, like, I'm going in with a plan for the structure.
As you should, as you always do.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's good. Who is this?
Jeffrey Willett, producer, music also by Jeffrey Willett.
Jeffrey. I'm sorry, Jeff.
It's Jeffrey. I don't know why you keep messing up.
Because he's
Jeffrey.
All right. Well, in any case, Sonya and I will see you next week with still more of season 2, The Process. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Hey, thanks for listening. If you like this season of Now That's a Great Story, or just getting caught up on the first, the best way to keep in touch is through the newsletter, paulkicksnewsletter.com. There, you'll get even more advice on how to be the best writer and storyteller you can be. In fact, right now, I've got a free PDF for you. The 7 rules top long-form writers follow to make more money from their stories. Sign up for the newsletter and you'll get the free PDF. Head there now, paulkicksnewsletter.com.